Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for another Parabellyx Cybersecurity Fireside Chat. Our subject today is one that's very fresh in people's minds, the breach of the U.S. Capitol, and how the events and lessons that are being learned from this physical breach can be applied to other organizations like large corporations or government entities. And we're going to do our best not to bring politics into the mix. Joining our panel today are three seasoned cybersecurity experts. Alexander Poizner, founder, CEO, and co-chief cyber strategist at Parabellyx Corporation. Hello, Alex. We've got Neezam Haniff, a cloud computing specialist with over 20 years of data center experience in computing, storage, virtualization, security, and networking. Welcome, Neezam.
Thank you.
And Eric Matthews, Chief Technology Officer and Senior Security Engineer, Senior Information Security Engineer at Parabellyx. Hey, Eric.
Thanks, Mike.
So good afternoon, gentlemen. As I'd mentioned before, the breach at the U.S. Capitol building is something that people around the country and around the world watched with shock and concern. And while I think it's fair to say that we were all worried for people's safety, I'll admit that as I watched the events of the days roll out, the IT voice in the back of my head was saying, "Oh dear, there's a lot of information and systems within that building that are likely unprotected right now." And this was confirmed with reports and pictures of politicians' computers being abandoned, unlocked, and still logged in. Now, this isn't the norm. Most businesses and government offices can expect not to be stormed by mobs of angry people. And I think it's safe to say that this was a mostly uncoordinated effort. But this event exposed some major vulnerabilities that analysts will no doubt be studying for months. And the lessons learned will likely affect policies within these organizations and security policy best practices in general for years to come. So if you're ready, gentlemen, let's jump into it. Alex, I'd like to start with you. Let's say you're a staff member at the Capitol. Alarms sound, and a security team comes in to evacuate you. It might not be an angry mob, maybe it's a natural disaster, but you've got about 30 seconds to minimize the cybersecurity risks. What would or should you do?
Great question, Mike. Well, first of all, when you have little time, and really it's not just about time, it's also you don't have much time to think about your actions and how you're going to do it. The few natural things that come to my mind is, first of all, you want to lock your computer. If it's possible, you may want, after locking the computer, yank out the power out of your laptop power adapter, just in case. But another thing that unfortunately happens with a lot of organizations, you do not have a clean desk. You may have some USB storage on your desk. You may have your cell phone, which may also be used as a second factor authentication. You may also have, as funny as we mentioned this, you may have some stickers on your monitor with passwords or any other information. I would say just grab whatever you can from those and evacuate.
Excellent. Gentlemen, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I have something I'd like to add. I think that this event is really showcasing how we need to think about disaster recovery strategies. Oftentimes when we talk about disaster recovery strategies, we're looking at it from a technological perspective in terms of we need to maintain an SLA on a service, or we need to be able to recreate that service in another site. I think based on what's happened here, I think we need to expand our coverage in terms of disaster recovery in terms of what happens if the building gets evacuated. So let's not think about the worst case scenario that the building disappears and we need to bring resources up somewhere else. But let's also think about those scenarios where, well, we didn't have a full disaster, but we had enough where there was an evacuation or there was some sort of event that occurred where people had to step away from their desks or their offices or whatever the case may be. So I think we need to look at our policies and we need to look at these scenarios that play out where people have to leave immediately, and what could we do from policy or technological perspective that would be able to aid us in terms of making sure that we could to some degree lock down certain things based on the fact that an emergency has occurred. So maybe changing the timeout on applications, things like that, to make sure that we work on the assumption that if something terrible happens, that we'll have other elements in place that can help manage data exfiltration or data loss.
Perfect. Good. Eric, anything you want to add to that?
Sure. So one of the more challenging things about an infiltration like this is that it's very hard to assess the result without a comprehensive audit of the risk. Any individual user obviously has a little bit of control over their own assets, as Alex said. But from a more fundamental organizational view, having a really good inventory, having a really good understanding of what your control points are and where your risks and exposures are is really a critical part of helping users be more proactive with their data, number one, and number two, in evaluating the potential risk to the business or the organization when and if a breach happens, or even during day-to-day usage with the normal flow of guests and contractors and other people through a building. So all of those things really play. To me, more important than the actions during a specific event is the day-to-day practice of maintaining good data hygiene and implementing controls that provide comprehensive and robust security and control throughout the organization, from workstations to endpoints. In other words, the example of leaving a USB stick out might be best served by having encrypted the USB stick in the first place, or by having a policy around data on those, or by providing a means, for example, a cloud solution to upload data rather than having employees have to resort to USB sticks. So an enablement process of making sure that users have the tools in the first place is probably the most proactive and best approach, rather than waiting until there's an issue and then trying to scramble around removing sticky notes and USB sticks from your desk.
Good hygiene and best practices then.
Mm-hmm.
So. All right, we've covered the end users. And I'm going to expect that some of this is going to overlap. Let's look at this from the IT security team's perspective. Neezam, often in the movies you'll see a big red panic button that locks down an environment if there's an intruder. Windows get barricaded, steel doors drop, alarms go off, but that button doesn't really exist in IT unless it's scripted or automated. So my question is, do organizations need a big red button to immediately secure their environment, both on premises or in the cloud? And what are the pros and cons? And what should or shouldn't that button do?
Well, under an emergency situation, I believe that immediate action needs to be taken, but I think that action has to be gauged. Is it necessary to cut access off to everything all at once? There are some inherent dangers in doing that, because if you just shut everything off all at once, you may disrupt certain flows of operation that are critical. So I think when we're looking at how we're going to manage the landscape and the attack surface when there's an attack going on, we need to identify what it is that we could take off the network or take out of service immediately versus what needs to remain in place and needs to be operational. And then from there, we need to look at it from an architecture, policy, governance perspective to figure out how do we safeguard certain business flows from continuing operating when we have an attack that is as dire as what happened to Capitol Hill.
Alex, you had mentioned leaving your desk and unplugging your desktop on the way out. Is that something that we should be looking at for server and switch infrastructure for the IT team to be doing on the way out?
Unfortunately, I don't think you cannot do the same for IT. I mean, think about it. It's not just our user systems that are on the line, and not just the servers. We're also talking about other infrastructures, such as security systems, building control systems. You have a lot of things on the network. So unless you really have a good design, and unless you can specifically hit a red button on a very specific segment of your infrastructure, it's going to be hard to do. I mean, obviously, we want to make sure that, for example, no new devices can be connected to the network during such a breach. We also want to try to make sure that certain applications are unavailable. This will require a lot of planning from the infrastructure team, and definitely this should be one of the incident response books if you want to create an incident response book for a physical building breach. Unfortunately for, or I would say fortunately for most of the organizations, the physical breach of the building is not a very high risk. So I don't think there are a lot of companies that have a very specific cybersecurity playbook for a building breach by a mob. However, if you need to create something like this, obviously you need to think about what needs to be still available to the people that are either monitoring the breach or are trying to remediate the breach, versus what are the services that should become unavailable immediately, because those are vulnerable to exploitation by people that may have breached the building.
Okay. So Eric, you're the IT guy. You security comes rushing in. You've got 30 seconds. You don't have a playbook. What do you do before you leave the office?
So much of the effectiveness of response depends on planning. That the spur of the moment choices like that, leaving your users or your IT staff in a position to have to make a 30-second decision is probably the mistake in the first place. Proactivity is the answer in security. If you have to do something, you simply take what you can, but you can't expect users to be reliable in that way. It doesn't work. So the reality is that there's an ongoing culture of proactive security awareness that really has to permeate, and that's the message that I continue with. An IT department or a user is faced with a nearly impossible task of trying to guess, and it usually is a guess at the time. Nobody really knows in the spur of the moment what is about to happen. What they may or may not be best empowered to do right at the moment. So having a clearly rehearsed plan, having a clear set of instructions that have been explained in the past is the solution. In other words, the reactiveness, we can provide lists of things that you might unplug all day long, but the reality is that nobody's going to do that effectively in the moment. And as we see with users and time again, if the controls aren't provided, they just do a scattershot of random things. So as an IT department or as a user, there's some reasonable steps you can try to take, but actually doing an impact analysis in a highly secure environment, making sure that you have a very good understanding of where your most sensitive data exists and how it can be best protected and what the impacts are if it's lost, is something that you need to keep your finger on, so that 30-second decision doesn't become the difference between a breach and not a breach. When a user is potentially running for their life, there may not be climbing around under their desk to unplug equipment and things like that. Like, that's not a reasonable expectation, I don't think. So that's really the reality of it, is that security happens proactively, and then reactiveness is nice if you can get it, but it's always going to be a case by case.
It's an excellent point. Preparation is really what we need. Alex, I want to jump back to you. Given the physical nature of the breach and the aftermath, what type of cybersecurity risks should the Capital Incident Response Team focus on mitigating immediately? And maybe, given the high publicity and heavy public scrutiny, are there any low probability, high visibility risks that they should be giving less focus to?
It's a great question, Mike. Obviously, we've seen a lot of articles, and some of those articles touched various security risks, and various pundits or experts were commenting on them. We've heard articles that saying that after something like this has happened, everything got compromised. Again, this is something that fairly low risk. I mean, what is the first priority of incident response? I mean, they need to establish what was compromised 100% versus what has a very high probability of compromise, and going so on and so forth until the lowest. We've all seen laptops of certain members of either Congress or Senate that were unlocked. When you see something like this, well, first of all, you have to assume that it's not just the laptop itself that got compromised. There may be also an account that was compromised, because it's not necessarily that this laptop remained unlocked. Perhaps somebody, like I said, had a sticker with the password somewhere, and somebody was able to unlock that laptop. Now we know that there is an account compromised as well. So account got compromised, data got compromised. I mean, when you think about malicious element, some kind of advanced party that will try to do something, utilize the situation such as physical breach for their own purpose, they do not have much time to act in this situation, which means they probably wouldn't be executing a full-scale attack. A full-scale attack usually needs to run low and slow. Doing something rushed usually will get it detected. So they may have tried to establish some kind of persistence with some of the systems that were unlocked. So that's another thing that security team will have to look at. Again, something else that may happen. Somebody may try to connect something to the network. That depends whether there is some kind of network admission control system there or not. We can only speculate whether it was there or not. Same thing with the data. We don't know which data was accessed. Was it just email systems? Was some kind of files, any applications? We can only speculate. The security team will probably be looking at logs to check if there are some specific access records at that particular time. But all of those will need to be verified, as well as obviously investigations whether somebody tried or established persistence will need to be done as well.
It sounds like you're saying there's a fair amount of forensic work that needs to be done before really attacking anything or mitigating anything. Gentlemen, do you agree? Neezam, Eric?
So the way I see this is that the incident response team is going to have to take a long-term approach to this because it's very hard to identify the attacks that occurred and what's in there and what's not in there. I think the incident response team is going to have to be running surveillance on the network and the endpoints for the next several months in order to identify and establish if there was a malicious attacker that was able to establish a bulkhead within the premise of Capitol Hill. And then from there, they're going to have to do some type of analytics to identify the good known behaviors of traffic, the bad behaviors of traffic, and the unknown. So there's going to be a lot of analytics and assessments that are going to have to be done in the coming months in order to be able to identify whether or not somebody's taken advantage of the situation and is using it for malicious purposes.
Good. Eric, next question is for you. Eric, can you set people's mind at ease? How does any organization know with any certainty that assets have not been physically compromised? Is that even possible?
The reality is that it's impossible to prove a negative, but it's important to be able to give a degree of assurance in that regard. So I think the path forward for evaluating that kind of risk is to take say a threat risk assessment approach, where you outline the potential risks, the potential threats, the potential vulnerabilities, give them a likelihood and a damage and a difficulty of remediation, and essentially run through and try to capture first the low-hanging fruit, then the maybe the hidden but important, and then move through evaluating the time and resources that are practical and the potential risk of going through all of the long tail, because the long tail is in something like the Capitol building is going to be just amazingly complex. So the reality in the Capitol is that I've heard it said in some news articles and other places that potentially everything was compromised, and that could, in a spycraft in an international organization, could mean everything from, chairs having listening devices in them to across the board, and obviously some of those are much less likely because this doesn't seem like it was a coordinated international attack. But it's not impossible that an agent took advantage of the circumstance to do something like that. So the reality is they're going to do an impact assessment. They're going to do a risk assessment, and they're going to check for it is reasonably possible. Can they prove that there was no breach of anything that wasn't checked? Probably not. But the reality is, for most organizations, and possibly even including Congress, that the actual final analysis is that they can come to a certain degree of likelihood of that being a breach, and assess and accept the risk as small as it is for any of that long tail being potentially impactful. And that long tail is going to have a different size and shape depending on the organization. Congress and something like the NSA or CSEC from Canada on one end, and say your mom and pop bakery on the other end, who just really doesn't care that much as long as they can process their transactions. So the difference between one and the other is pretty stark, but that's why you do a risk assessment and really evaluate those risks quantitatively.
Gotcha. Alex, you feel the same?
Well, just to add to what Eric has said, I mean, in many situations, it will boil down to additional analysis that will probably have nothing to do with technology initial. Intelligence services or security or whoever is going to take that on, they will start going through a lot of various visual sources, the photos that are getting posted, the photos from the journalists, the video feeds from the building and from outside the building, in order to establish whether they can identify certain people that have been indeed some professionals or intelligence service agents that were coming together with the crowd into the building. It's a fairly big unknown, but I don't think the technology services should focus on this. The technology services really should focus on answering two questions. First of all, what has been accessed versus and what may have been accessed, and then obviously establishing what has been compromised for sure, where you need to take corrective action as soon as possible, versus, as Eric said, risk-based analysis of what might have been compromised in order to prioritize other response and remediation activities.
That's a great point. I just want to add one thing that you said there. The value of a risk-based approach is definitely in the long term, and there certainly are areas of immediate compromise that require action. So taking a careful and considered threat or risk assessment shouldn't delay or impede the immediate action of for example, locking accounts that may have been or had some evidence of being directly compromised. A lot of times the highest risk that we might call the low-hanging fruit in a threat or risk assessment tends to be fairly obvious to the staff. Now, it's easy to miss those things, so it's important to go through the threat risk assessment and really outline all the potential threats and brainstorm with all the stakeholders. But that immediate response of doing the sort of basic locking and control of high risk and high likelihood of compromised assets is certainly something to jump on right away.
Excellent. So, Neezam, you've been waist deep in data center and cloud security for a while now. in the age of remote working and hybrid environments, what physical and environmental security controls are still practical? What role does maintaining a physical perimeter have in the world where many organizations are moving to the cloud?
So what I'm finding is that despite the huge adoption of cloud, there's still a play for on-premise infrastructure in that sometimes workloads are not well suited for going into the cloud. So as a result, companies are finding that they have to maintain some sort of on-premise presence. And as a result, all the physical security contexts that we need to worry about become applicable in this scenario. And with work from home, so because of what's been going on with COVID, what I've seen happen is that because everybody's been forced to work from home, the buildings are still there, but there's nobody looking at, well, people don't go to the buildings. And now it brings a new dimension in that how do we manage physical security? Because when there's people in the building, you have some semblance of security as a result of that presence. But when nobody's there, it could become an open avenue for infiltration, because if people know that there's nobody going into the buildings, they could try to make their way into the buildings. And once they get in, they're able to survey what's available and take advantage of, I don't know, Ethernet ports, Wi-Fi access, or other pieces of equipment that happen to be running with nobody in the building at that time.
Sure. Go ahead.
So I actually had something to add to that. Fundamentally, I have seen a shift in mindset, and I think that this needs to permeate into security culture as well. As services, both infrastructure and data, as well as individual user devices and even user work locations migrate into public spaces, into public and I'll say personal assets. The idea of the perimeter, the physical perimeter, is losing value. When we had mainframes, when we had Windows 95, they just simply didn't exist. Some of the access controls that we can implement today, and the physical perimeter of the building became the primary arbiter, and then later the digital perimeter, say the perimeter firewall, became the primary arbiter of security, and that is a real it's really challenged by the shift to BYOD, work from home, and cloud compute. And every business, every single one, I mean, I think the numbers in the 90s say they are or currently are moving toward their primary compute environments being in the cloud, their primary work locations, so it's probably not 90s for these, but the primary work locations being from home, private locations, and the primary devices of work, often including personal devices. The physical perimeter then means nothing at all. And you can access the same data from your Android that you bring to Starbucks with you, or your home workstation, or even the Wi-Fi at Starbucks. And then the physical security doesn't matter as much, frankly. The onus moves to digital security controls, to endpoint security, to data security, and platform security. And by doing that move, you mitigate the risk even inside your building. So if you have, for example, a biometric awareness, there's some new technologies. For example, if you carry your smartphone, you can configure Windows so that when your smartphone leaves the vicinity of your desktop, then it immediately locks, and that's a standard Windows 10 feature. By all means, use that. It's not the end all of security, but it's one of many layers that have started to remove the concept of physical security from and separate it from the concept of digital security. And I really think that movement is accelerating and will continue to accelerate with cloud, with BYOD, with work from home, and all of the above.
Right. Alex, yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Sully. Neezam?
Yeah, so I'd just like to add to that. So when COVID hit and there was a huge transition to work from home, what I observed was that companies were so focused on security as it exists within an office building. When everybody had to start working from home, that brought a whole lot of challenges, because a lot of access control challenges came up in that companies weren't really ready to embrace the digital workplace in terms of working from home, because they hadn't fully thought out what it would look like if their entire population of the workforce had to work remotely. So this brought a huge number of different challenges into play that we're working through collectively. We're getting there, But I think there's some teething pains in trying to get through all of this and being able to provide a proper work from home experience for employees and whatnot.
And I know we're a little off of the Capitol building subject, but Alex, there's speculation that commercial real estate may be suffering. People won't be going back to the offices. So is the on-prem environment going to go the way of the dodo bird?
I don't think so. I think in the end, a lot of employers will offer some sort of flexibility, but there will be many people that after so many months of just sitting at home, they would want to come back and work from the office at least a couple of days a week. I mean, the flexibility will be great. Also, don't forget that in certain environments, in-person meetings and discussions are crucial. Those may be in medical facilities when it's fairly hard to look at the same analysis and documents and ask patient questions remotely. It may also be in the environments where people are concerned about high confidentiality of the data that is being discussed. In some cases, this data may also be physical, that cannot leave the premise. So there are multiple situations where people will still want to work from office. Again, as Eric and Neezam said, it's not going to be the case where a physical perimeter is going to protect you. I mean, a lot more companies may switch to somewhat either shared office environment where some of the facilities are going to be shared, or even relax where you can work from. I mean, there are, even in the banks, you see a lot of people for half an hour grabbing the laptop and going down to the Starbucks. Hopefully they're not connecting to the public Wi-Fi from there, but again, we don't know that. So office is still relevant, buildings are still relevant. When it comes to physical security versus cybersecurity, it boils down to the path of least resistance. I mean, if it's easier to access the data through a network or through a laptop, so be it. But if it's easier simply to steal a printout or steal an authentication fob so you can access it remotely, that's also a possibility. So physical security will never go out of question. It just will need to be more flexible. Perhaps for work from home, some extension of physical security may need to apply for some of the organizations. That's also a possibility, and that's dealing with home break-ins. What's going to happen if somebody is going to steal not just a laptop, but there might be printouts, there might be also some kind of data storage devices, or even, like I said, a second factor authentication fob may be stolen from home. So physical security still is relevant, still has a lot of work to do.
Well, then expanding on the physical security side of things, Eric, I'd mentioned earlier the evacuation during the breach of the Capitol exposed multiple unlocked systems to intruders. And while most businesses can safely expect not to be stormed by mobs, physical breaches do happen with a shocking frequency by people who simply walk into an office space looking like they're supposed to be there, affording the opportunity for intruders to steal hardware or information, install exploitative software, or even connect unwanted devices. So what actions could an organization take, or are there specific cybersecurity technologies and strategies that help make public buildings, such as the Capitol, more resilient to cybersecurity threats in the event of a physical breach?
Well, let me talk about two things. First of all, there's the tried and true technologies, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about the ideas for the future. Fundamentally, security, in my opinion, isn't about preventing things, but about enabling the actions of users to be done in a safe way. So that's an important distinction. When you prevent people from doing things without alternatives, they just simply circumvent your controls as users. That's how it works. In certain circumstances, obviously, hopefully the government officials have a little bit more awareness of that, but that's not always going to be the case. And that's, users are users, and we say that as security people in a mocking way sometimes, but it's meant in the best way possible, in that we know that people are struggling with access to data, and they will always circumvent that. So in a modern environment, just the standard controls of passcodes, even biometrics, cards, access control cards, and regular segmentation of access is important. The standard recommendation that's been around for 30 or 40 years is, escort your visitors, have them wear badges, challenge anyone who's not, user identity cards as access tokens, biometrics for high security locations is reasonable. That's all good stuff. What we need to move forward in the future is toward those security controls being more and more user-friendly and easier for users to incorporate into their daily work routine. Biometrics that, for example, a facial recognition actually may be a great technology. Obviously, there's privacy implications. I'd love to see those addressed by private databases and other things like that don't centralize those and do respect users' privacy and other things like that. But facial recognition biometrics, as you approach a door, that it opens maybe in combination with your badge or swipe card, can be very simple, nothing to do. And then even the theft of a card or a token of some kind doesn't provide an attacker access. The challenge we have is that a lot of times these controls are arduous for users, and they get bypassed, they get overlooked, and people find ways around them, or they find ways to shortcut them. A great example of that is screen lock timeouts. High security environments often implement a 1 minute or a 30-second screen lock timeout. Those are not, users hate them, so they push back on them. I suspect Congress people hate them, and Congress people usually have a lot of power over the people that work for them, so they probably get those removed. The reality is what we need to find as security people, as organizations, we need to find enablement technologies that really take those ideas and make them user-friendly. So much better than locking a screen after 30 seconds of inactivity, which may happen if you turn to answer the phone, maybe an awareness of whether you're present or not, for example, using cameras or sensors of some kind. And if you physically leave the presence of the machine, then it just automatically locks. If you come back, maybe it recognizes you in a biometric way and unlocks. And there's a fairly simple and user-friendly way to control that, which would prevent an attacker from having any real use of those devices at all. And those are, I think we're moving toward that. I see this with, I look at my devices now, there's a fingerprint scanner right here in front of me. There's a facial recognition on my device, and it doesn't even work if you revert your eyes away from it, because it's user friendly in that way. And I think that's a great step forward to have those sorts of controls that really incorporate well into users' daily behavior.
Neezam, how do you balance that? How do you balance security and user enablement?
I think it comes down to holistic design. So as a former security professional, there was a joke that we were considered the Department of No. Every time somebody wanted to do something, the first answer from security is always no. And I think what it is that there needs to be a change in mindset, but the mindset's not just with the users, but it's got to be with security as well. And we need to be more holistic in the way that we come up with the ideas. I mean, I echo Eric's sentiment in terms of having user-friendly security. I think from governance and policies, and even from an architecture perspective, we need to find ways to incorporate humans to be part of the security design, because I find a lot of times we're so focused on using technology to solve the problems, but we don't come up with abstract ideas that we can start enabling users with so that they get imbued with those ideas and it just becomes second nature to them. So I think it's a multifaceted approach. Yes, we do need technology, but I think we need to come up with ways of enablement through abstract thought, ideas and concepts that we can enable our users and people in general so that they develop better security hygiene habits, so that when they are confronted with these situations, that they're going to be able to kick into this mentality of saying, okay, things have gone terribly wrong. And based on my understanding of security, these are the things I'm going to do to make sure I cover my bases when it comes to making sure everything is protected.
Good, good. Alex, you're a worldly fellow, and it's well established that that you're well read in military strategy and tactics. I understand that you've got a 2-inch strategy book that's propping up your camera right now. International adversaries and their respective intelligence agencies were no doubt paying close attention to these events. What do you foresee as future implications from a cybersecurity perspective? Can these adversaries use or recreate this mob effect to potentially compromise technology systems within other government agencies and organizations?
Yes and no. I mean, creating mob effect, obviously we've seen it done before in multiple countries, but mob effect also has a lot of unpredictable actions. I mean, it's unless the mob is well organized prior to the event, controlling the mob is next to impossible. So creating something like this for the sake of doing something during the breach, I frankly don't think that in many cases it is worth the risk. But certainly those intelligence agencies are watching this closely. I mean, they're probably analyzing the photographs from the events, the video from the event. There is a lot of intelligence even in those. If you think about it, they also try to establish, based on the event, some additional knowledge in terms of various things that are going inside the building. So I think from that perspective, they are getting much more rather than how to organize a mob to create some kind of breach with focus on them getting in and doing some additional intelligence activities such as stealing the data. I don't think this is highly realistic, but certainly possible.
Right. Eric, you had brought up the point that there's nothing that says that there's nothing to say that there weren't agents or specific intelligence folks within that crowd that stormed the Capitol. Do you agree with what Alex is saying?
I mean, it's really speculative to claim that there could be. It seems to me that it was a fairly spontaneous reaction. Rumors are fly in every direction about certain people of receiving dark payments and things. I don't really want to speculate on those too much. So, what is the reality of agents getting involved in a mob like that? Probably small. I think the real foreign intelligence risk, other than the things Alex already mentioned with the photos and other analysis, is potentially the loss of devices or something specific. And I don't know if there's some rumors about an unknown number of IT devices. It probably won't ever acknowledge publicly how many and what they were, but there's a plausibility in uncovering laptops that have classified software. I know that some of the intelligence organizations run essentially like classified networks that run on special classified encryption. I mean, not classified encryption, but that run on some sort of packages like VPNs that provide specialized access to certain high security networks with sort of containerization concepts and things like that. Maybe a foreign agent getting a hold of one of those can do some reverse engineering work to target that. I suspect that there's probably alternative security controls like credentials and other things that they can easily lock out. So I don't expect that foreign agents are getting direct access to classified data as a result of this, but it does expose some concerns around just the sort of immediate access that somebody who's, say, were to invade the building intentionally could or could not access. Again, regardless, it's just a general data hygiene I think a bigger concern is, I mean, we heard a few years ago about senators stuffing papers in their pants and walking out of, classified libraries, and those are, equally valid concerns that don't require infiltration by hordes of people. So, again, using unapproved devices and unapproved email servers, using Twitter as a primary means of communication, all of these have risks that I think could be addressed in various different ways. I think this capital attack from an IT security perspective, I mean, there's some real concerns there, but they're not above and beyond a lot of the other security, IT-related security issues that we see. Obviously there are concerns in other ways about government and democracy, but the IT security angle, well, relevant and should be taken as an important reminder to be diligent in IT security. It doesn't also, to me, come across as a likely and significant threat to say intelligence data.
Mm-hmm. Gentlemen, I've come to the end of my questions, and it looks like we might be coming up close to the end of our time. I'd like to open it up to the whole table just for a quick round. Are there any other immediate lessons that you think have been learned, or any concerns that we haven't discussed that should be top of mind for CISOs and security teams these days? Alex, I'll start with you.
Well, the main lesson from this, I think, is the unpredictability of the events. I mean, we knew that the rally is going to happen. However, there was no expectation that the breach would occur. And in reality, if you would ask someone to predict the events that we had, I don't think somebody would have seen this particular flow of events. So it's just I want to finish this conversation by saying that look, we live in an extreme uncertainty. The ambiguity of what's going to happen next is huge. If you focus only on your version of the future, then you probably will make a mistake, not far into the future, but very short into the future. So that's why when we're focusing on the ambiguity and uncertainty, especially when we're talking about events such as what happened, which is extremely low probability, extremely unpredictable event. I mean, the only thing that you can do is divide and conquer. The question that you have to think about as somebody like a cybersecurity strategist is, how can I divide this into smaller problems where you can really have a very small, or at least a finite set of rules to the problem. In this case, I can make predictions. In any other case, I may make predictions. However, I will probably focus on something that is probable, and the extreme impact is going to come from something that is improbable that I have never predicted.
Neezam, anything left on the table for that we haven't touched on or haven't discussed?
No, I concur with what Alex has said. I think the primary lesson learned in my mind from Capitol Hill is that when we're looking at incident response, again, oftentimes we look at it as a planned event that some particular series of events are going to occur. And what this is showing is that it is not always the case, and that we have to consider spontaneity as something that we need to be able to address, and understand that as best as our plans are, that there may be situations play out that we can't really counter for. So we have to figure out what are the coping strategies that we can develop based on what we've seen in order to help mitigate to the best extent things like this from happening again.
Right. Eric, I'll throw it to you for last words.
Sure. I'm just going to loop back on one thing I said before, because the reality is that in an unpredictable circumstance, when everything comes apart and things that you never thought were possible happen, your reactive response may often be wrong, and your ability to bring in new information and new tools and try to arrange services and solutions is going to be compromised. So the reality of security in general is that you have to have at least some plans proactively built and ready to be deployed. You have to have some strategies, and you have to have some layers for your security and defense. We always talk about the onion and defense in depth, because when everything comes apart, you need something to fall back on, and that often is your planning, your strategy, your tools that already exist. Trying to develop new strategies and tackle issues that are unexpected is immeasurably harder when you don't have plans in place and when there hasn't been a proactive approach and the tools don't exist. So the reality is, with the Capitol breach or any other security breach, the first few days are defined by work that was done in before it happened. And although, you know, there's always a different response, and every circumstance may dictate something slightly different. Really having those plans, having those tools, and having that defense strategy in advance is how you make sure that those controls don't get breached, and how you make sure that the data doesn't get lost, and how you make sure that your infrastructure and network stay and remain secure. So having those discussions in advance, and I can guarantee you the U.S. government has those, they have a pretty clear understanding of what data is where and who has access to what in general. No, nothing's perfect, and obviously budgets prevail, but that's, I think, the lesson, or at least my message would be is don't neglect planning for the future.
Good point to end on. I like that, gentlemen. I thank you for your time. I really appreciate your insight and your participation. I hope we get an opportunity to do this again soon. And let's hope that well, we never have to go through an experience similar to the events in Washington last week. And if we do, that we're well prepared for it. Take care, gentlemen. And I look forward to talking to you all next time.